everybody's having a good Indaba. It's like only 2 days in, I'm exhausted, but anyway. Okay, so look, the topic of digitization is, as Rainer has said, you look back over the last sort of couple of years and some companies have been down this journey longer than others. But I think if you look over the last couple of years, you'll see companies who've spent a lot of money and have actually got a lot of value for it. The pathway to this place has also been, littered with lots of bodies of companies who've spent large amounts of money and got nothing to show for it. And so the real question is kind of why and what can we actually learn from these sort of digital transformation journeys. As Rainer said, we've got 3 fantastic panelists here, 3 individuals who are passionate about digitization and the impacts of on their business. But also, I think 3 panelists who have actually learned a heck of a lot and have actually done this within their organizations. And so really, that's the wisdom we want to tap into today. So really to introduce the panel, on my left here is Ricus Grimbeek. Ricus is the CEO of Trevali Mining. Rick Howes in the middle, CEO of Dundee Precious Metals, and then Gordon Smith from Anglo American Platinum, Executive Technical Safety and Sustainability. So there are kind of 4 broad topic areas that I think we want to talk about today. One is around operating model, the other one's around people, another one around infrastructure, and then value. But let's start off with the sort of the operating model question, and really, I guess, question to all 3 of you. And so, just kind of chip in and take how you want to deal with this. But as Reino said, when people think about digitization, often we focus on the technology portion of this, right? We focus on the data, we focus on the gizmos that we actually put in the mines. At the end of the day, it comes down to people. And so as you guys think about your digital transformations in the last couple of years, what in the organization has got in the way of digital transformation? Ricus.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for asking me to be here. I said to someone this morning, I've been in the industry for 30 years. So I started when I was 12. That was at an ESG panel this morning. Lots of people worried about child labour. But it's I think that the stuff that comes in a way is not a clear vision from the board level down. Because if you don't have support from the board, you're never going to be able to take this all the way through. Because the reality is, if you want to truly implement a new way of operating, there'll be lots of things that don't work. It's a totally different way of structuring a business. You culturally, you've got to shift the organization from the top down, this type of organization to this type of organization. You need to take people away from focusing on experience and history as a predictor of what's going to happen to now everything needs to be based on data, decisions based on data. It's all of those elements, plus you need to get into a more agile way of working. So you can't it's like people laugh at me when I say you've got to start thinking in hours and days, and you've got to execute in hours and days. You can't execute in quarters and years. The other one is that we've got a culture, especially operational culture, of planning is rough guidance, and it needs to move to planning execution, and that precision execution becomes so critical because that's the only way you can really get the value from implementing these systems. That's where short-term interval control becomes very important, but it's great to see what you should have done. You really need to get to the point where you can see what you need to do and then impact what people are doing in real time so that you can make the changes. That means a totally different way of operating. And then you've got all the social issues that come with that, the fact that the type of work that we'll be doing in the next 5 to 10 years at our operations are going to be very different. And it's how do we, when I talk to the workforce, I talk about the fact that the workforce of the future is my current workforce retrained. But you've got to find a way to get people on board to do that, because a lot of people have never been trained to do something new for the last 20, 30 years.
Rick?
Yeah, I sort of echo what Ricus said, but try to maybe put a bit of a different take on it. So I know when we started, we were worried about, you know, all the change that would happen and how we would make it. But I would say the first thing we did, well, we did one thing right, which was focus initially on the organizational model itself. In other words, the operating model, as we call it. Rather than start with the digital technology, we started with that. And you know, and then those of you who spent time at mines know how mines really get things done, and we tend to lack discipline around that. We tend not to really organize and plan the work effectively, and then schedule it, and then execute it, and then monitor that. So that's that whole feedback loop part. And so, you know, we're constantly firefighting and kind of going in and dealing with change or interruptions and I'll say delays and other things. And as a result of that, perhaps lack of discipline and going down at the start of the shift and not knowing where the equipment is and not knowing where the materials are for the job and not knowing those things and then scrambling to try to get the work done, you know, that if that's the foundation you start with digital, you know, I would say don't. I would just say stop and take a look before you do that. So we did that, and we ended up, you know, spending almost 2 years building a foundation around an operating model that essentially is a plan, do, check, act model, simple model, but essentially ensuring the quality of the planning was there, the detail in terms of execution down to the task level by the hour and minute, and then the feedback to that. So the technology really takes you where you can't go with paper and these types of systems. So if you try to go down that road and don't bring the technology in, you have trouble because you can't. The paper won't keep up with what you need to know about the status of everything, the state and status of the mine as you go back around. So it sort of dovetails nicely that the technology came along for connectivity to all of the equipment, to the people in the field, and the work that goes on. And so once you had that with the discipline around the sort of way of operating that you need, that really translates into real value, because then you're eliminating a lot of the waste that happens in the mine, inefficiencies that happen because things aren't organized, and you know, you'll still deal with obviously interruptions that are not planned, but essentially you reduce the ones that you could have avoided if you planned and executed better.
Okay, great.
I can only support what's been said so far and add to it in the sense that if we think that digitalization's not happening or digital transformation's not happening in our organizations, there are little pockets of it everywhere along the value chain where smart people that we employ are motivated, they want to deliver differently, they're using digital in many, many ways, but it's almost skunk works, it's undercover, you don't know it's there. So all of this stuff is happening right through the value chain, and it's trying to understand in that absolute mix, melange of all of these things as to where do you focus, where's the value, how do you prioritize it, how do you get people onto a process of planning, scheduling, resourcing to deliver specific initiatives that fit in with the overall strategy, that are become visible and deliver and create a foundation, almost like a stepping stone that allows you to move to the next level. Because it's happening all around us. Yeah? When we first started our formalized digital transformation within Anglo Platinum, and basically did a survey across all of the operations, mining operations, from exploration right through to marketing. There was stuff happening everywhere, but it wasn't connected. There was no common objective. There weren't common platforms. So it's being able to harness all of that enthusiasm and motivation in the organization, direct it, but then put it into a program which allows you to deliver the value in the places where you want it. And at the same time not kill the enthusiasm, because there's nothing worse than having your favorite project being deprioritized in favor of somebody else's.
So as I listen to you guys, you've spoken about the need to have a vision of where you're trying to drive. You guys have mentioned having a portfolio, as you think about how you organize all of this, the need to kind of build in some of these kind of constant feedback loops, understand how an actual mine is operating, making sure that you focused on the things that will drive value. Now, a question that I often get from clients is, how should we organize this? Should this be a centralized effort, or should this be a highly decentralized effort, right? As an example. Another one would be, gee, should we be actually merging our IT and our OT together, leading that as kind of one portfolio? You know? Gee, should we actually have a chief digital officer and a chief innovation officer, and are those kind of one and the same thing? So what are some of your thoughts on that, or gee, you don't think it really matters?
I'll tell you one thing, if you want to start a long debate and get nowhere, you start a debate about should you integrate IT and OT. But you know, sometimes that's what organizations like doing, is, you know, have long debates about stuff, you know, keep people busy, but not really make any progress. So yeah, I think, you know, it must be inclusive. You know, if it's not inclusive, then it's not going to work. It needs to be messy, because there is no textbook for this. You need to be willing to fail, and you need to be able to talk about what's not working, and you must have a listening for what's not working, not a closing down things that are not working. Yep. So, and when I say these, they sound like logical MBA type of conversation, but the reality is it's not that simple. You know, because we've got cultures where people do not tell you bad news. So we've got cultures that are not inclusive. We've got top-down autocratic cultures. So, you know, just assuming that people will tell you when things are not going well is going to be a recipe for a failure. So, you know, it's super messy, and you must be willing to live with that, and just, you know, it's a bit like the you know, the old sailors. You know, I'm from Swedish background, so Viking background, and I just got this thing about they were pretty brave people, you know. They trusted their skill of dealing with whatever's there in the next moment, because there were no GPS or you know, maps of where they were sailing to. They just sailed as a team, and whatever showed up, they dealt with. You know, and I think that's the type of entrepreneurial teamwork that you need to make this work. Is, you know, you trust the people around you, and you just talk about what needs to be done the next step.
Okay, Rick.
Yeah, I guess I think what Ricus said about the culture is probably, for me, the most important piece. Yeah, a culture that's ready for digital transformation, I think, is one that's definitely an open and engaging style, and where people are really being asked to contribute and to add their efforts to the journey. You know, whether it's top down or bottom up, I guess, you know, I would say it depends how aspirational the company is. If you're really aspirational in terms of what you want to achieve, then you know, having the vision translated into sort of a clear idea of where you're headed helps to drive it. But in the end, it's always the bottom up that implements these things. So even if you have that vision, you know, it's getting the engagement in the actual work of the change, and how it happens, and who it affects, and all those things. So I don't think there's a right answer. I think some companies have come at it as operationally driven, I'll say, with a leader at the operational level who's very good at that and is doing the leading. You know, others, they may not have that, and they're looking for that higher level support and direction. So, you know, I think it varies between companies, but I would say the main thing is how you do change management, engagement, and that part.
Okay, Gordon.
Again, building on that, that's the joy of being the tail end of this process.
Oh, the next question I'm going to put you first. So.
From the top, it's a case of really saying, at executive level or board level, depending on the structure that the organisation you've got to have somebody who is the champion. They've got to be passionate about it, and most importantly, there's got to be a trust element between the board members, the other executive members, that actually you can trust that person, take a risk with them, because you don't know where you're going, just the point. You're going north, but you actually don't know what's going to happen when you go north. But they've got to believe that you're going to take them on that journey north. So I think that's a really important part. Then the other part is to say the people who know our business and understand our business and who actually make it happen are the people, I hate the expression, at the bottom, who've got their hands in the gearbox. And they've got all the ideas of how you can make life easier. You're going to plan maintenance, asset reliability. The guys who do the work know what needs to be done to actually understand what systems will make their life better and how digital can help them. So passion from the top, trust from the bottom, create the space to allow the ideas to permeate into the organization. Then the real challenge is right in the middle. You have a situation of, say, take somebody like myself who's partially digital. Look, I'm still using paper. There is a phone here somewhere. And so we really don't normally have the skills in the organization. Where do you find those skills? You're not going to find them in your own people because they've been grown, nurtured in the culture, the ways you work in your own organization, unless you're already a sharp-edged digital organization. The people that have got those competencies are outside. So if I look at what we did, we looked at saying we've got some internal people who've got a bit of it, and it may largely be financial and ERP system focused, and say take what they've got. Then go out and get the best in the consulting arena, and on specific projects pull them in. Then say, well, what about contractors? We all know people that we are good, and we say, I want you, I want you, I want you, and you contract them in. And then also look broadly and allocate, create the accountability of a champion inside in that middle space to use that matrix structure, because you won't find the skills inside. So it's passion from the top, ideas from the bottom, and right in the middle is the hard competencies that you've got to pull together a team, which won't come from yourself. It's improbable it's going to come out of your own organization. To then drive it, going back to my earlier point, on specific prioritized initiatives that will produce value, that allow the trust that is being built in yourself, if you're doing it, that the board sees you putting runs on the board. So here's the priority, I put together the team, it's happening, and it becomes a self-nurturing cycle. When we first started this, the first presentation I did to the board, I really was uncomfortable, even though I know the board well and they know me well, because it was such unknown territory. But as we've delivered, I come to them with some quite outrageous ideas and they say, go for it. So it becomes a nurturing process.
So Gordon, that's a great bridge to the question I was going to start asking around kind of skills, right? So you've touched on, in the midst of this transformation, you're going to need some skills that you may not find inside your organization. What about when you actually now get to call it the fully run state? You know, you've actually started the transformation into digital, and you've got now new routines, new ways of working, you've got the information in the hands of people. You know, by all accounts, that probably means that we're going to need some new roles going forward that don't exist today. It means that we may need very different kinds of skills in some of the existing people that we have. I think, Ricus, you started off by saying that you know, you were going to, when you've talked to your workers, that you're actually going to build all of those skills internally with your existing sort of workforce. So how do you think about this now a couple of years out? Are you looking at a very different skill set? Are you seeing a big challenge in building those kinds of skills in the organization?
Can I follow through on that?
Yeah, go for it.
Seeing a challenge, one heck of a challenge, and I hope there's nobody from HR here. But there's so many systems that are embedded that they almost become the company. And I think we've all got that type of stuff in our organizations. And being able to get the person management part of the business to understand that this change has to happen, and it doesn't always fit into a very nice OD diagram, and you've got to take, again, a bit of risk, and the skills, draw out a role description which you actually don't know what has to go in that role description because you have an idea where it's going. So it's pushing back against the inertia of the organizations that we have. That's been the biggest challenge. But again, it's a case of saying, if you can show the value construct of it, it can be carried through. But we're still battling with that right now, quite frankly. It's very hard to bring in long-term positions related to this activity that people don't understand. So, yeah.
And so, Rick, I mean, when you did this at Chelopech, right, so you inherited a workforce that came from a legacy Soviet sort of era, very top-down, very hierarchical, and I've obviously heard you speak about this topic several times. So, but yeah, why don't you share your thoughts on, I guess, some of the skills that you had to kind of build through that process?
Yeah, so if everybody starts there, actually, I'll tell you, it's a bit easier. Actually, I'm surprised the answer, but you know, people who've been used to being told what to do all the time and have sort of always longed for some ability to step up and make their own decisions. Mm-hmm. When the change comes, they actually quickly step up. So that's what happened with us. We acquired a mine in 2003 that was very much a Soviet era style of operation, top-down type things. Nobody did anything with it. The boss telling the next level down what to do. So decision making and all that, you know, was very slow and cumbersome and usually not good. So all those things changed with really. Our approach was really the opposite of that. We pay everyone a good salary. We encourage everyone to contribute to the level they can. We try to define appropriately the appropriate discretion that people have in their roles, and then really expect them to make decisions and to interact with their peers in getting things done. So that culture took off. Really took about 4 or 5 years, and then I'd say that's when we started digital. Was after that. So 2003, 2008. 2009 we really started digital. So, and then once that happens, people, you know, then I think, you talk about well, what skills don't we have in the industry? Well, we certainly don't have data analysis skills, and don't have, that sort of mix of engineering and data together, particularly. And so that's the area that we said, okay, well, how do we get that? Well, we thought about the data scientists being brought in, but we thought, really, can we teach our engineers and our sort of our experts some of those skills themselves, and then that we don't have to have sort of another set of skills that we. So that's the journey that we went down, and it's semi-successful. I won't say fully successful, and we did need a lot of outside help to do the training. But we trained really our middle management and our professional, like our engineers and metallurgists and those types, to start to work more closely with the data. And then they've started to learn these analytics techniques and methods and tools and all that sort of stuff. And they're starting to use the data. So that's, to me, mostly what this is about, is how do we use the data and how do we organize the data. So the organizing of the data was the other skill set we didn't have. So when I say we organize the data, because we organize ourselves in silos, which is kind of the mining thing, right? I don't know if it's the same in all businesses, but certainly in mining it's specialized functional specialization, and then everything is thrown over the fence between the areas. So when you start to say, well, how do you organize around data? Well, you got to basically break down those silos, so the data has to actually seamlessly integrate across the organization horizontally. And that part, skills in the IT group, first of all, because IT group basically saw themselves as providing support for functional applications. And so we have to hire data stewards or data people that basically understand the data and how you amalgamate and integrate, amalgamate, organize, standardize, translate, relate, all those things about data that you have to know. That's a skill set that most IT groups don't have. And so then that's the big one we had to add.
Okay. So Ricus, I mean, from your perspective, you've got a footprint in multiple different geographies, from Canada to West Africa, Southern Africa. And what's your experience been in trying to build these sort of digital skills or skills that you think you're going to need in these different locations?
Yeah, I think it's depends on where you are on the process of implementing. You can also look at the skill sets in terms of technical skills. People are using equipment differently, using data differently. Management skills, I totally agree.
Like more of the softer skills?
The softer skills, so because to me there's quite a distinction between change management and transformation. So change to me is like a steam train that becomes a bullet train. So it's an engineered process. It's very top down. You manage it. You tell people what to do, and you can actually look at a bullet train and you can see the evolution change process from a steam train to a bullet train. You look at transformation. There's like a caterpillar that becomes a butterfly. So there's nothing in a butterfly that tells you it was a caterpillar. The process is kind of in a cocoon. It's not kind of engineered. It just happens. And And when you think of what needs to happen in this industry, it's not a change process. It's actually a transformation, because it is this mixture of all different things that need to work together to come out with a totally different answer in the end. So the skill set I think is going to be the hardest for people to get is a leadership skill set of leading that transformation. And that's the difference between alignment and enrollment again, because alignment is very much in the change management world, where you align people and you kind of get the outcome of that is people follow a plan. And enrollment is where you co-create with people a vision, and people come up with their own ideas, but they have a shared vision of what it is you're going to create. And I think that's what we need, because I said earlier, it's messy. There's no clear standard process. There are lots of these systems that we have today that actually kind of go 100% against that. The HR systems, the way we promote people, the way we pay bonuses, what we bonus people on, those are all things that is actually against a lot of what we need to achieve. So, and that's why I think the hardest skill will be that transformational leadership skill, and that's from the top down. And and I've seen this across the continents where we operate. Certain cultures where I totally agree with what Rick is saying, like in the South American culture is very, you tell people what to do, they do it exactly like that. It's much easier to get stuff implemented. Yeah. But there's a ceiling to what you can get to in terms of the inclusion, and so it's this fine line between, if you want to become more democratic from an autocratic world, you've got to actually tell people what to do. And you've got to tell them to become more democratic. So it's a very fine line. So it's when do you stop telling them, and it's an art. It's not a science.
Do you think that it puts a how do I put this? Do you, I guess, feel as a CEO that you almost become, the chief digital evangelist across the organization, or have you kind of created other evangelists alongside of you to kind of drive that change and get that collaboration?
Oh, I need good people around, because I'm pretty dumb sometimes, So, and I'm also, it's you need to be willing to be wrong, and to be humble about that. There's no one person that can get this right. I think one of the other skills that I believe is so essential is the skill for especially senior leadership in the mining industry to create partnerships with people outside of the company. And it's not the old supplier king queen type of relationship. It's a true partnership, co-creating and working together to do something. And so it sometimes feels a bit like I'm crazy, because not a lot of other people say the same things that I would say, but you've got to believe that this is the right thing to do, and maybe it is, be totally, absolutely passionate about it, but surround you with people that want to do it, but you, again, also be patient with those that don't jump on board immediately, because they can be so valuable after a while to help you, pull back where you're just doing dumb things, So it's be patient and listen well.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk a lot about infrastructure. And so I'm actually going to start with you, Rick. So again, having had the pleasure of hearing you speak many times, I think you tell a great story about how when you set out at Chelopech, you ended up stringing together a whole bunch of different systems, did it on a bit of a shoestring budget, and it wasn't like a big, massive ERP transformation or anything that you kind of put in, right? So you kind of did it a bit of the cheap and nasty, but you got a great result at the end. And so yes, really a question to all three of you, but maybe start with you, Rick. But what would you do differently from an infrastructure perspective? What are the things that, what are the three things you would focus on from an infrastructure perspective going forward?
Yeah, definitely I would do it differently. Not that, it wasn't fun what we did.
Yeah,
it was
absolutely.
Fun. I would say, you really have to think about architecture of what you're doing, and because you can create a mess. So the issue is, without having put some thought into the architecture up front, and it's an evolving architecture because the technology is moving as fast as it is. But and you can create what I call a data mess, and that's why you really need to decide what you're trying to do first. What is the purpose behind what you're doing, and what are you going to do with data in general? And then from there you drive your architecture. Now, you know, if somebody said, I want to be like the manufacturing world in an Industry 4.0 model, you know, there's a lot of architectural information that you can go to and say, okay, that's how you do it. In the mining world, you know, we have way more obstacles to getting to an Industry 4.0 model. And so, yeah, you got to kind of recognize those obstacles that create the problem for mining. And one of the biggest ones, non-standardization, really, in the industry. So you're going to end up with what I call point solutions and silos in some of the things that you do, and how you're integrating this business across the is not easy. I mean, and so even with our, you know, raising the profile of IT into the strategic realm, you know, so that you can talk about, you know, how does the business work, not how does IT work, how does the business work, and how do we want integration of the business, you know, particularly horizontally, but also vertically. You know, it's going to drive that design for the architecture, and then, you know, all these components of the architecture, you know, your communications networks and your I'll say operational control systems, and then your next layer up in terms of the data that you're collecting to start to trend, and the business integration side of it, and how the data sets that are being used for the analytics part of the business. That all has to be thought through, actually. Yeah. Now, I couldn't have done it, I would have said, in 2009, because it was sort of an infancy conversation. But today, if I was starting out today, I would put that front-end work really to start to define that architecture, including how the data architecture works and how there's so much data that you got to decide what you're throwing away, what you're keeping. You know, do you want millisecond data? What are you doing with millisecond data? You know, is it anomaly detection, trending for improvements? So all those different uses of the data, you know, some of it's going to be processed on the edge and dealt with immediately. Some of it's going to be collected and used for trending. So the whole set of things. And as like I say, I would personally, if I was starting out today, I would go to the Bosch factory, walk around there for a few weeks and figure out how they did it all, because they probably have it figured out. I mean, not that manufacturing like that is the same, but there's some elements that are helpful to us.
So, Gord, I mean, turn to Anglo Plats, right? So Anglo Plat's huge company by itself, but you're also having to fit in with a broader Anglo American stable, right? And so how do you sort of think about this architecture question, you know, within the broader Anglo context?
Carefully. Very, very carefully. So going on the route we're going down around the data, the infrastructure, take a step back and say the infrastructure is a key enabler. But the infrastructure varies. So we run a large open pit operation. We've got 2 hard rock trackless room and pillar operations, and we've got a deep level narrow tabular conventional operation. And you look at those, they're 3 totally different things. Amandelbult, the narrow tabular operation, is 27 kilometers of strike, 14,000 people. You want connectivity between people. So you have to say, well, what do I actually want for Amandelbult? What is necessary at Amandelbult? And what do I need in terms of infrastructure? And what data do I require in the system to allow me to achieve the objectives we're trying to achieve? Versus Mogalakwena, 100 million ton a year rock moved, open pit operation, beautiful wireless nets on surface. There you want to control autonomous vehicles, and you have a different requirement. So being able to fully understand what you want to achieve. It goes back to my point of prioritization of saying, yes, we need infrastructure, it's a key enabler. We need to understand what data do we want for what purpose. Again, I'll speak with engineering discipline. Engineering, asset reliability, requirements are quite different to controlling an autonomous vehicle. Understand that for the different applications. So, and we learnt a lot from your operations, and many of our guys have visited and looked and said eventually at Amandelbult we've been putting in fibre on the levels. And if you work it out, I did a little sum here, that's why I had to refer to my notes here. For the 27 kilometre strike, we mine 175 panels a day. The panel to crew ratio is 2 to 1, so that's 350 panels that you have to have, and you need communication between them, and they cross multiple levels. It's 800 kilometres of fibre you got to put into one mine. So you say, well, how much fibre do I put in and where? And then do you need fibre to get right into each working panel, or can you have a wireless repeater system? So you take fibre to a certain point, and you then have something which is mobile, which we learned from yourself, Rick, and take it through into the operating areas. Whereas the Mogalakwena solution is totally different. But we'll never ever automate, well, that's a hell of a bold statement, let me take it back. It's improbable that we'll automate to the level, at Amandelbult, to the level that we'd be automating operations at Mogalakwena as an open pit. So again, it's the horses for courses. And then the last point I'd like to make on the data, which is I wouldn't say a sore point, but a point I always drive with the teams that I'm working with, is to say, I like to start with the end in mind. One view with data is to say, collect everything, work out what you can do with it later, determine the relationships between them, and you'll discover stuff. I agree, but maybe that needs to come later. Rather start with the end in mind. What are you really trying to achieve? What is the minimum data required to achieve that, and what could be marginal on the edge of it? Make sure you've got the systems and the sensors in place to achieve that, to transmit it, to learn from it, and then very rapidly repeat the learning cycle. Virtually everything that we do has got a very short half-life, whether it's the technology that we're buying and installing, or it's the learning curve they're on. It's a very short half-life. So you've got to accept that you're going to do something. It's going to be 95%, well, no, not even 95, 85% right. You're going to move down the journey, and in that process of moving along the way, you discover what you didn't know before because you just simply didn't know it, and then you do the next iteration. Discard, move on, discard, move on. So it's a continuously evolving learning process, which is so contrary to the old way that we've done mining. It's getting, again, people to get into that way of thinking, and again, I get it from, like Ellie, who's my lead digital transformation. She comes in and says, we've spent all this money, I need more. And I said, but I gave you all that stuff. And so she's educating me. I'm educating the rest of Exco and the board and saying, you're getting the results, but you've got to accept that we've got to learn. And a portion, you can retain the learning, but some of the hard stuff you throw away and move on. That half-life is really important. Trying to understand the half-life for different areas is crucial as well.
So, Ricus, you've had an interesting journey the last couple of years. I mean, come from South 32 and Vale, and now you're in the driver's seat at Trevali. So, how do you sort of think about this architecture, infrastructure question? Given all of those experiences from organisation much larger than Trevali, and what is like fit for purpose, and you've probably got a bigger ambition now on what you really want to achieve at Trevali than even at like Vale and South 32. But
yes, I'm same as Rick. You think back then, and you look what you have now, man. You just want to do it so differently. Yeah. But it's So the architecture stuff, I just get clever people to come and help me with that because
for sure.
I really have got no idea. I know the difference between hot, warm and cold data, and edge and those big words. I learned all that stuff. But I just, it's important to get the right partners in to come and help you with that. And I think I'd say the hardest architecture to deal with is the brain. And the easiest way into an organization is, or to get a change accepted, is through safety. And I found that if you can wire people to accept some new technology to help them become safer, it changes the conversation with unions. The acceptance of the new technology becomes a lot easier. So that, I would say, is the hardest architecture, is actually the brains.
So I'm going to end off now, I guess, one last question to the panel, which is around value. So you do this all over again. What's the one area that you would focus on where you think there's disproportionate amount of value to be had through digitization?
For me, it's very easy. I think a lot of companies focus on automation and all the other very expensive, high capital intensive. I think it's all about short-term interval control, the ability to plan and schedule and design work and execute that work much better. So, every mine plan has, certain assumptions in it. You assume grade, you assume ventilation, you assume where people are, you assume equipment availability, and it's visualizing the key inputs into your plan in real time, and then have the ability to change what people are going to do. So that crew that pitches up at the crib that get told what to do, if you know that there's no ventilation when they're on surface, and you've got a operating or a optimization platform, there's no supervisor in this world. I've worked with a few, used to be one myself, and there's no supervisor in this world that can work out what the right next thing is to do if you can't go and drill that specific heading. And you need platforms where you can optimize. So, MineRP is a great example of a platform where they optimize, mine plans and, all the different elements of, what is the right next thing to do. And it might be the crew doesn't go underground, they go to training that they would have done next week, but the best thing for them to do today is to go on training. So that's where I think if I spend my money, it'll be on visualizing those key inputs into the plan, and then allowing the operations to get the best next plan at their fingertips.
Rick?
Yeah, ditto. I mean, that's where we started, and I would say we're happy we started there. Definitely not automation wasn't our focus, and I would say automate the process plant for sure, but I would say for the mines, and particularly the underground mines, there's about at least 30% efficiency improvement in, I would say, every mine. I would say there's not probably an exception to that rule in terms of where you could initially get the value in the business if you start there, really. So if I was any company, I'd be starting there. And then you can go, I think these companies that are much bigger, obviously, that are open pits and large scale operations, and their logistics is 90% of what they do. For sure, you can automate those trains, automate those trucks, automate those things. But I think where we and I'll call it smaller mining world, have a lot of people underground and a lot of it's hard to see automating all that. Is that really it's how we can organize the work and manage the work better and essentially stay on track with our plans and schedules and optimize really. So there's a ton of work there. I'd say it will evolve over time though. I think this is kind of a journey. So initially, if you said what's the end state of that, it is the intelligent mine, because then all those decisions and things, there's a certain amount of things that, if you had smart machines talking to smart machines, eventually you'd take the human intervention out of the decision making, really. But, that's a ways off even yet. And so I think you got to start just with sort of give your people the ability to manage and operate the operation better. So.
Gord, you get the last word.
Yeah, no, I agree fully. Ditto. So it's faster, better operational decision making. I think gives the quick return on it. And if I could just add one other aspect, is to say, the whole issue of asset reliability. If you can create more reliable assets, you can operate your assets better and harder. So you can drive throughput. You change maintenance intervals. You have an impact on many of the aspects that will drive real value. So if you think the business that we've got, you're moving stuff from the ground to the market. If you can do that faster, lower cost, it's there. So the second phase is really to say, yes, I agree, ditto, better and faster decision making at the operational level. But whilst that's happening, the kit that allows you to make those better and faster operations has got to be reliable. So building in that asset reliability, which then drives throughput through your system. And there's another, to use Rick's term, there's somewhere between 30 and 40% more out of most of what we've got installed already that's not being capitalized on, because we've just accepted, well, you can't get it to work that hard, but actually you can get it to work that hard. And digital actually enables much of that.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I've been told we have time for maybe 3 questions. So anybody want to ask a question to the panel?
Gordon, just take a question. I think our biggest challenge in South Africa So firstly is around the unions.
Yeah.
And secondly, part of that is the whole issue around work ethics, absenteeism, and that kind of stuff. I think that's where we're all battling in the mining side, is that you'd never know whether the crew is there or not, or partial crews, and then you have to make a plan because you cannot do it safely. I think that's still a major challenge that we see in South Africa. What is your views on that?
I agree with you. It is a challenge, but if you look at it and say much of, I think, what the panel's been saying as well, this is a transformative process. So what goes in parallel with the technology is the people and the organizational cultural transformation. And that doesn't take 6 months or a year. It can take 5, 6, 7. We've been on a journey for 6 years, and we're just seeing a change around accepting different ways of working, different levels of motivations in certain teams. So in parallel with the transformative process of going back to consultant sort of space, people, processes and technology, we change how we work, the processes, and we change the technology, but we've also got to change the people's heads, hearts and feet. You've got to get them to work together. So there's a cultural transformation that has to go with it. And part of that is, again, creating the assurance that the jobs that are coming, some jobs are going off and changing, and new jobs are coming, but there's always work that's needed in the industry. I use a very cliched sort of example of when cars first came out, the guys who were putting shoes on horses were threatened by the fact there's no work. But right now, we all take our cars to a technician who's the equivalent of the farrier of those days. They make sure that the shoes are on your car. So the work is there, it's just changed. So it's getting that transformation, the belief, the trust in the organization that as we go on this journey and continue on the journey, that they are part of it and coming with. And it's a big challenge, but it takes time and it takes a lot of passion and commitment.
One last question.
The question on partnership, I think Ricus mentioned partnership briefly. Typically you need an ecosystem of players to achieve these very complex digital programs. Do you have the sense that ecosystem, those partners, the OEMs and the services providers and solution providers, are ready to align their objectives? So this is a business model question. Are they ready to align their objectives to what you're trying to achieve as the industry?
Interesting. so I think one of the challenges we have is that in our industry we've got not ecosystems but ecosystems. So the challenge for us is how do we move away from that? And so the partnering side is not just from mining companies to those ecosystem partners. It's actually the other way around as well, because both have to drop their old business models and come up with a new business model. And again, there's no real textbook for this, other than maybe somewhere in the app development, the software development world. That's where you see a lot of those type of partnerships happen, where people just co-create and co-develop a product, and they actually don't waste a lot of time in the beginning around IP and who owns so what, and what bonus are you going to pay me for this level, and so we all have to think very differently about this.
Yeah, you have to look in the mirror as a mining company, because if you're going to try and sort of say, our previous face that we put in front of you, which is really about squeezing the last dime out of the supplier, we're actually talking about something different. So for sure, that ecosystem, what you're creating around this is it has to be a different one. And so if your procurement department is really good at that, don't get them in the middle of that discussion. But I think the management of the companies have to go in with their eyes open and have to talk openly about how value can be co-created, really, and what's the previous relationship that deals with how each one tries to get the better of the other. I think it's not going to help that conversation whatsoever. So yeah.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. That was a very interesting discussion, and hopefully you enjoyed it.